Hey guys, these are 3.1 notes on parallel lines and transversals. So let's go ahead and do a quick review of some things that we need to know before we get started. So take out your notes and maybe a separate piece of paper in addition to these notes as you follow along with the video. All right, so the first thing I want us to talk about is going to be, go ahead and draw this. Draw two lines. Remember, lines have arrows on both sides because they go on infinitely. If you have two lines, and I want to say that these lines are parallel, the way we depict that is you would draw two arrows on both of the lines. Now these two symbols are different than the end arrows on a line because these two symbols represent that the lines are parallel. And this is going to be important to this section because what we're doing is showing specifically the relationship of angles with parallel lines. So we have to know that these lines are parallel. Okay, also if we labeled this top line with an L and the bottom line with an M, the way you can show that they're parallel also is saying L is parallel, those two lines, mean is parallel to, and then M. So L is parallel to M, meaning they will never intersect and they belong on the same plane. All right, the third thing I want you to write on here, or the third line, is going to be the transversal. Now, we've already talked about a transversal. This line, a transversal, is a line that intersects two or more lines, creating 8 angles. So go ahead and label that and draw that. Transversals. Now let's go ahead and label these 8 angles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now make sure you're labeling the same way I am so that we can actually use it to describe some relationships here. All right, another thing I want us to talk about is let's do a quick review. But let's see, what about angle 1 and angle 5? What would be the relationship between angle 1 and angle 5? Think about that for a second. Well, that relationship between 1 and 5 is it's the same side of the transversal in the same position. So those would be considered a corresponding angle. All right, so now the next thing I want us to see is what about angle 2 and angle 4? Angle 2 and angle 4. Now those actually do have a relationship. They're just not the same relationship as what we've talked about previously. This is all the way from chapter 1. The relationship that angle 2 and 4 has is actually a vertical angle. So if we remember, we drew a diagram that looks a little like this, just two lines that intersect one another. And remember, we drew an arc on the opposite angles, and that means that they are congruent. So these angles are congruent. So if I said that angle 2 is 100 degrees, then angle 4 must also be 100 degrees because congruency means they are the same thing. All right, let's look at one more. What about angle 5 and angle 6? 5 and 6. Now if you look at angle 5 and 6, you'll notice that it creates a straight line. Those are considered your linear pairs. And if we look at linear pairs, it's a straight line with two angles that are adjacent to one another. Now if we look at those two angles, 1 and 2 here, those angles would equal 180 if we were to add them together. And that is called supplementary. And we have to remember this before we move on into our next section. So let's go ahead and do that. Take out the notes, 3.1 notes that are posted, and follow along as we go through it. Your notes look like this. All right, so if we were to get started, so let's say we have those two parallel lines that I showed you. And they are cut by a transversal. Now remember, these must be parallel lines. They cannot just be two random lines that may possibly intersect. So if we look at it, corresponding angles. Look here, let's find corresponding angles outside of 1 and 5. Another set of corresponding angles would be 3 and 7. So angles 3 and 7 would be good examples. And those angles, 3 and 7, are congruent, meaning they are the same, congruent. Now let's look at alternate interior angles. Alternate interior, let's do an example of those. Remember, interior angles are the 4 inside angles. The alternate interior would be 4 and 6 would be an example of a pair of alternate interior, angle 4 and 6, and those are also congruent, meaning if we knew one, we can figure out the other. Alternate exterior, that's going to be using our outside angles, and they must be on opposite sides of the transversal, and a good example would be 2 and 8. 2 and 8. And those are also congruent angles. Now let's move on to consecutive interior. Consecutive interior. So we know that interior must be on the inside, and consecutive means they are on the same side of the transversal, and one good pair would be 4 and 5. Angle 4 and angle 5. And actually, if you look at these, they are not congruent. They are not the same angle. What they are is supplementary. And remember, what supplementary is, they equal 180 degrees. So they are supplementary. And the last one on here would be the consecutive exterior angles. So they're on the same side of the transversal and an outside angle. And a good example would be 2 and 7. So angles 2 and angle 7. And those are also supplementary. So we have to know this in order to continue doing what we're supposed to in example 1. So let's go ahead and look at example 1. It asks us to identify the angle pair as either congruent, meaning they are the same, or supplementary, meaning they add up to equal 180, which is a straight line. So let's go ahead and look at this new figure here. It should be identical to the one that we drew earlier. So let's look at A, 3 and 5. So angle 3 and 5. So we have angle 3 and 5 here. And are they congruent or are they supplementary? Well, if we look at this, they are congruent. And now we need to write down the reason why they're congruent. Well, if we go back to here, what type of angle is that? So if we look at it, 3 and 5, those are alternate interior angles, so that's why they are congruent. So our reason is that they are alternate interior angles. Now, do me a favor and do not abbreviate this to AI or anything else. Please write it out. Get practice identifying these words. 1 and 8. Let's look at that one. B, 1 through 8. 1 through 8 are consecutive because they're on the same side, and exterior. So they are consecutive exterior angles. They are supplementary. Now I would recommend that you pause the video here and try C through H before I give you the answers on those. Give it a shot, see if you can work through it and figure out those answers for yourself, and then we will go ahead and go over it. So pause the video now. All right, guys, so I guess you are done. So let's go through C through H. So let's look at 2 and 6, angles 2 and 6. Those are congruent angles because they are corresponding angles, corresponding. Now D, 1 and 7, 1 and 7. Those are also congruent angles, and the reason they're congruent angles is because they are alternate exterior. Alternate exterior. And then 4 and 5, we already kind of talked about that, but 4 and 5 are supplementary, so they add up to equal 180 degrees. And the reason they are supplementary is because they are consecutive interior. Consecutive. 4 and 5 consecutive interior angles. F, 3 and 7. Look at 3 and 7. Those are congruent angles because they are corresponding angles. Same side, same position. And 5 and 6, if we look at 5 and 6, those are supplementary. They create a straight line. And the reason they're supplementary is because they are linear pairs. Linear pairs. And 2 and 4, if we look at 2 and 4 here, they are congruent, meaning they are the same. And the reason they are congruent is because they are vertical angles. So I hope you did well on those. We are going to move on to example number 2 and add a degree to our measurements. So let's go ahead and look at the measure of angle 1. They give us this angle here. Measure of angle 1 is 65 degrees. So if we look at the measure of angle 1, so they want us to find A through G, which is the rest of the 7 angles listed. So on measure of angle 2 here, they want us to find the measure and then give our reason for that measure. So angle 2, if we look at angle 2, well, angle 2 is a linear pair with angle 1. So it's a linear pair to angle 1. Now, anytime you write an angle, make sure you're using this angle symbol here. So if it's a linear pair, that means it's supplementary. So they should add up to equal 180 degrees. So if I took 65 plus the measure of angle 2, which we don't know, we should have 180 degrees, right? So the way we would solve that, we would just subtract 65 from 180, and we get angle 2 equals 115 degrees. The reason it's 115 is because if I add both of those angles together, I should get 180. And 115 plus 65 equals 180, which is a straight line, meaning it is a linear pair. Now let's go ahead and look at angle 3. Angle 3 is here. Let's do it in relationship to angle 1, which they've already given us. So in relationship to angle 1, it's a vertical angle. So it's vertical to angle 1, and if it's vertical to angle 1, then it's congruent, meaning it's the same. So if angle 1 is 65, so is angle 3. Measure of angle 4. Let's look at measure of angle 4. Now we have a few different reference points we can use. We can either refer it to angle 1, angle 3, or angle 2. Well, really probably the easiest one is to look at angle 2. Well, we already know angle 2 is 115. Well, if angle 2 is 115, then angle 4 is also 115 because they are vertical angles together. So it would be vertical to angle 2. And now there are several. You could also put it's a linear or linear pair to angle 1. Either way would work. And let's look at measure of angle 5. If we look at measure of angle 5, let's refer it to angle 1. Well, they are corresponding angles. So it corresponds to angle 1. And if we remember, if it's a corresponding angle, then they are congruent. So then whatever angle 1 is, so is angle 5. So angle 5 is also 65 degrees. And let's look at angle 6. Well, angle 6 is a linear pair to angle 5. So if it's a linear pair to angle 5, then they must be supplementary, so they have to be 115 degrees. And F, the measure of angle 7. The measure of angle 7 is an alternate exterior angle to angle 1. So it's an alternate exterior to angle 1. If they are alternate exterior angles, they are congruent. So then it is also 65. And the last one, measure of angle 8. If we look at the measure of angle 8 to angle 1, it is a consecutive exterior angle. So if they are consecutive exterior angles, then they are supplementary, so it must be 115 degrees. All right, let's go ahead and look at a little bit of algebra with these. This is kind of what they're asking. This is going to be your homework, numbers 1 through 8. Let's do number 1 together. So it says if L is parallel to M, so L is here and M is here. L is parallel to M. They must be parallel on the transversal in order to solve these the way we are. We're going to classify the marked angle pair, so what is their relationship, and then we're going to solve for X. Okay, so what is the relationship between the two angles that they give us? It is a corresponding angle. So these are corresponding angles. And we know that corresponding angles are congruent. So if they are congruent, they equal one another. So we would take both of these angles and equal them to each other. So our first angle is 5x minus 2, and it will equal 58, the other angle. And now we just have a basic two-step equation, and we will solve for x. So in order to solve for x, we add 2 to both sides. 5x equals 60. Divide by 5, x equals 12. So once you complete this, box your answer. So you should have the relationship, it's set up, and then solve for x. And let's look at number 4. We're going to do this one as well, so you'll be fully prepared for your homework. Same thing, L and M are parallel to one another. We are going to identify their relationship and then solve for x. So the two angles that they give us is this angle here and this angle here. So what is their relationship? Well, they are both on the same side of the transversal, which means they'll be consecutive, and then they are also both interior angles or inside angles. So they would be consecutive. Interior is their relationship. Now, consecutive interior angles are not congruent, they are supplementary.